Deep in the northlands of Upper Michigan, there lies many historical and natural wonders waiting for the traveler to unearth. One of the draws to Michigan's Upper Peninsula, aside from the stunning shores of Lake Superior and the beautiful surrounding woodlands, is the history of the copper boom that occurred in the mid-1800s and waxed and waned in the 19th century. In 1840, the state geologist of Michigan, Douglas Houghton, wrote a document describing the rich copper deposits located on the Keweenaw Peninsula. During this time, settlers in the area began to discover early Native American mining pits that exposed veins of rich, pure copper. They were discovering the fact that the Keweenaw Peninsula housed an extremely vast geologic feature that ran almost its entire length and into the state of Wisconsin. This large range of bluffs that would come to be known as the Keweenaw Belt housed millions of pounds of copper that formed at a 45-degree angle to the horizontal, a geologic characteristic quite unique to this land. Having discovered copper in several remote areas, word spread like fire and a mineral rush began as investors, miners, and entrepreneurs would attempt to lay claim to their share in the copper-rich real estate. One of the centralized and earliest locations for copper mining in Upper Michigan was in the woodlands of Ontonagon. Located several miles south of Lake Superior, this area is replete with high, rough bluffs and a jagged landscape, a perfect location to begin mining. Some of the first to spring up in this area were the mighty Minnesota mine in 1847, which was the most famous mine in this area. This mine worked the bluffs until the end of the 1800s and produced 17,000 tons of copper ore. It was the most productive copper mine in the U.S. between 1855 and 1862. However, little is known of the mines surrounding this great giant that worked in similar fashion with varying degrees of success and for varying lengths of time. Some of these mines included the Peninsula, National, Rockland, and Michigan mines, and they paved the way for larger, more famous mines in the 1900s, including the Quincy mine further north in Houghton. Mines of the 1800s copper rush utilized shafting techniques where the miners would burrow to intercept the vein of copper and follow it at its natural 45-degree inclination. As we've explored many of the mines in Upper Michigan and rappelled down some of these shafts, many in terrible condition, it is clear that they follow this inclination as opposed to presenting as completely vertical. Once copper was found, horizontal levels, or drifts, would be dug to open ground up for what was known as stoping. Stoping was a technique used by miners where they would hollow the ground in great chasms to remove material in places where the mineral vein became thick enough to work. Some of these stopes are massive, even requiring the miners to leave pillars behind to hold up the rooms. These early mines are impressive for the sole fact that they were dug and drilled by hand even before the invention of 1900s mining technology that allowed mines further north to exponentially extend their operations. It is quite fascinating to enter some of these chambers and workings as it makes you stop and think to yourself, wow, I am walking in a mine that existed before the Civil War. In this remote part of the world, the mines paved the way for roads, rail lines, and harbors to be built in Upper Michigan to send the copper ore down to Detroit for processing. The mine towns that developed included several different facilities for processing the copper. Stamp mills were used to pulverize the native rock into tiny bits to help separate the copper. Hoist houses were used to contain the steam engines required for hauling men, tools, and ore out of the mine, which could reach great depths. In the case of the Minnesota, the deepest of its 11 shafts exceeded 1,200 feet past the 13th level. Contrary to mines of the West out in the desert, water was a major issue for the mines of Upper Michigan. In the springtime, vast amounts of snow would melt and send a cascade of water into the mine workings. Thus, pump houses were required to hold the pumps that would consistently dewater the mines. These mine towns also had churches, stores, blacksmith shops, and rail stations. As the 1800s rolled along, the price of copper waxed and waned, peaking near the onset of the Civil War in 1861 as the military's need for raw materials increased. Every decade saw a dip in copper prices, and many mines faced temporary or permanent closures. Ownership of the mines also transferred between companies, as some analyzed the old mine tunnels of the previous company and tried to weigh out the profit to be made from reopening the mine. Many of the mines in this immediate region had exhausted themselves by the end of the 17th century as new mines on different bluffs opened with more modern technology, including the two-man drill, better blasting practices, and more powerful hoisting equipment that could draw heavy ore cars from greater depths. An excerpt from a document written by Parlzer R. Brown in 1908 comments on the state of the National Mine after it had been left abandoned for only 9 years. In this document, he says, shafts numbers 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all hopelessly caved and never were intended for or equipped with modern hoisting apparatus. A primitive bucket and chain was used in these shafts, and none of them reached great depth. He goes on to say that number 2 shaft reached the greatest depth, but owing to the nature of the hanging wall at that point, it would undoubtedly be a waste of money to try to open the shaft even for pumping purposes. This shaft is undoubtedly caved from the 3rd to the 5th levels and perhaps further. The feasibility of opening a mine on old workings was sometimes up for debate. Although vast quantities of copper probably still exist in these mines, they were often too collapsed or dangerous to reopen. Many of these copper mines were eventually left to nature and abandoned after many years of service. The companies, having collected varying degrees of profit, now realized the initial boom upon which their industry was built no longer paid. Now, over a century later, there is even less evidence remaining that the mines of the 1800s ever existed. Although scarce, remnants of the mine workings in towns that surrounded them are not impossible to find. Building foundations and waste rock piles can be found easily by a short trek into the woods. Copper deposits can be found with metal detectors, as the early mines of the 1800s did not have the technology to retrieve it all from the rock, so they simply discarded it in their burrow piles. Some of the old shaft openings also exist. Some lead to underground workings. Others are extremely collapsed and dangerous. It should be advised that anyone entering abandoned mines are entering extremely dangerous terrain, and without the right equipment, it could be fatal. Likewise, if the mine is on private land, it is illegal to enter the mine. Many companies such as the Adventure Mining Company and the Caledonia Mine offer tours and mining experiences right in Ontonagon County, at the epicenter of the Ontonagon 1800s copper boom. These family-run companies offer glimpses and tours into incredible preserved portions of their mines, including underground workings, standing headframes, and even allowing you to scavenge the waste rock for minerals pulled directly from the mine. Overall, the early copper boom helped build Upper Michigan and supported the growth of early American industry. Carving roads into the landscape, building railways in the freezing cold, and tunneling through the hardest bedrock were everyday ways of life of the men who moved their families to this remote, undeveloped part of the world. It is truly a fascinating portion of history, and I hope this video helped shed some light on the lesser-known mines on the Upper Peninsula. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more history on some of the individual mines in this region. Check out my channel too for explorations of some of these amazing places. Not all of the mines have been completely reclaimed by time.